Hi there, welcome to the Schwowin's Nest. My name is Sandra, and I'm so glad you're here. If you are new to my channel, welcome. I'm so glad you clicked on my video. If you like what you're seeing so far, I would love it if you could hit that red button and stick around a while. For this second project, I'm starting off with a base piece of wood that is a 2x6 that I cut square using my miter saw. Then I'm going to use a 2x4 and I've cut that square as well. So the bottom piece is 6x6 inches and the top piece is 4x4 inches. I started by screwing in from the bottom first so I could attach the two together. Then I realized once I had these two attached that I needed to put the spindle on the smaller piece first. Anyway, I ended up having to pull it all apart and start over. But basically, you're going to be attaching the spindle to the 2x4, and then you'll be attaching the spindle in the 2x4 to the 2x6. And I used screws for all of this, but I did need to pre-drill a hole in the spindle because that wood is really hard. This is the spindle I'm using. It's left over from one of the bed frames that I took apart last year. I've got the spindle all put together, and now I'm going to show you what I'm putting on top. I am going to screw in this white and black enamel colander that I got at the thrift store for $2.99. I was super excited when I saw this because I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. First, I'm going to need to drill another hole in the top of the spindle, and I'm using a drill bit that's a little bit smaller than the screw I'm going to use. I'm going to go in fairly deep because I want to make sure that this is nice and secure. Now, even though the colander has holes at the bottom, the hole isn't big enough for me to fit the screw in that I would like to use. So I'm taking a metal drill bit that's quite a bit larger than my screw, and I'm just popping it through the hole that was already there. Now, make sure when you're wanting to get away any of the shavings, these are metal, they can cut you, so just be very careful when you're drilling with metal. And now my screw fits in there perfectly. Now all that's left is to put these two pieces together and hanging on to the spindle because it's going to start to spin in just a second. There it goes. So I've got to hang on really tight and then just put my screw right down using my impact driver. And I really love how this is turning out. While I was still outside, I gave the spindle one coat of spray paint, not a full coat. As you can see, some of the wood is still coming through, and that's all right because I'm just going to take some of my chalk paint and give it a rough coat. I do want some of those dark pieces to show, especially because the spindle has so many grooves in it. And then I don't even have to distress it. It's already distressed. I really love how this turned out, and I can't wait for the weather to get even better so I can put some live plants in it and put it out on my front porch. If you saw my thrift haul, you'll know that I purchased a set of these canisters. I'm using the medium size and the small size for this project. I taped around the edges on the inside of both the canister and the lid to help me prevent any bleed through. Now I'm going to give them just one coat of Rust-Oleum clear matte finish. I like to do this on all of my shiny ceramic pieces because that helps the paint adhere better. Even if I'm using real chalk paint and not my DIY chalk paint, it really does help the paint stick and gives a really nice smooth finish. The matte finish has dried, and if you take a look at the bottom left corner, you'll see the lids are not shiny anymore. I'm now going to take some painter's tape and just mask off the top portion that is brown so I can get ready to paint the bottom. The paint I've decided to use for the bottom is Folk Art Home Decor chalk paint in the color Parisian Gray. I just get this at Michael's and it's not that expensive, but I love it because it is a one coat coverage. So you can see how beautifully it's going on. I'm also using a really soft brush to minimize the brush strokes. I'm also using my turntable, which I always forget to bring out, but this time I remembered. It's just going to make painting this round surface so much easier. I'm going with a modern farmhouse look for these canisters, so I'm doing the lids black. And I'm just using my own DIY homemade chalk paint for this in black, which is latex paint and talc. And I always like to put my projects on cardboard so I can pick them up and move them to somewhere else to dry. Look at that gray color. I am in love. I just love that color. It's my absolute favorite. Now I'm just going to use the same paint that I used for the lids and paint the brown section. I'm just going to freehand matching that line all the way around. If it gets a little bit squiggly in some spots, that's okay. I'm just going to do my very best to get this covered. I also only needed to do a one coat coverage with the black. I just needed to touch up in a couple of spots, but with the sealer on top, so the Rust-Oleum Matte Clear Sealer, it really helps also for your paint to get good coverage. Once everything was dry and I was able to handle the canisters without fear of smudging the paint, I decided to use a piece of Cricut vinyl and create a stripe just underneath the bottom of the black. And you can see me here just pulling off the vinyl. I just cut it out with my paper trimmer, and now I'm just going to put it on the first bump or ridge. So it's really easy to do this, and it looks like it was painted on, especially once it was sealed and everything had the same sheen. Using my Cricut Joy, I cut out the words coffee and tea in these larger letters, and because they're larger letters, I'm able to just pick them up with these sweet little pair of tweezers that my wonderful friend and subscriber Denise sent me from Arizona. Thank you so much, Denise. I use these all the time, not necessarily in all of my videos, but they are right next to me and they're really helpful. So thank you so much for sending me these. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just place the stickers on and rub them down without using the transfer tape because, again, I don't want to take any chances that the paint will come off with the transfer tape. I also went over the canister's lid and the bottom with another coat of the matte spray sealer to seal in the paint and prevent any chips. I think these turned out really nice. I have had this styrofoam pear in my stash for a really long time. It has been used for the fall multiple times over. It's been painted multiple times over, and now it's getting another update. I'm using some painter's tape just to mark off sort of the bottom third or so of the pear, making sure that as I do it, it kind of gets as straight as possible all the way around. Although that was kind of difficult because of how the pear sits when it is flat on the ground. It can see here that it's got a really steep angle. So I did my best. As you can see from this clip, I had already painted the top of the pear black, and now I'm going to be working on the bottom. I'm using a chip brush and my walnut gel stain by Americana, and I am putting a faux wood grain finish on the bottom of this pear. Now, normally I do that with a white base, but because this was just an off-white base, it worked fine as well. I come up from the bottom and go down from the top, and the chip brush allows me to put all of these beautiful lines in it to make it look like wood grain. The trick to this is to not press too hard with your glaze or your stain that you're using. You have to just go really lightly and pull it down until you get a little peak of that lighter color showing through. Once the stain had a chance to dry a little bit, I went over it very lightly one more time just to deepen up the color a little bit. I wanted it to be a true dark walnut. And so now I'm just taking the same brush and just dragging it over very lightly just to deepen up the color, but still retain the wood grain effect. This is a small piece of scrap wood that came from the Dollar Tree. You know, those wood planks that they have in a pack of 5 or 6. I drew out a leaf shape, and what I'm doing with my miter shears is just giving it a squeeze all the way around to get somewhat of the shape. Now, it doesn't cut through all the way with my miter shears, so I'm going to be working on this a few times. I go over it once and then I go back and I squeeze again. And then I found out that if I just put the wood more at the tip of the miter shears, I was able to trim it a lot easier. Once I had that all cut out, I did sand the edges a little bit, but I didn't mind the little wonky edges on it. And now I'm just using some of these wood carving tools from the Dollar Tree. I'm using the V shape to just kind of cut out a little bit of some lines to mimic the lines that you see in leaves. Now, this turned out okay on this side, but then when I tried doing it on the other side, I was going against the wood grain and it literally just pulled off chunks of the first couple of layers of wood. So then I decided to go with it and I just kind of dug out all of the little pieces and created a leaf shape inside a leaf shape. You'll see what I mean in a second here when I go ahead and stain it. I'm using the same gel stain in walnut and I'm just going to brush it over lightly to give it a nice stained look. Not as dark as the bottom of the pear, but you can see that it's going to bring out all of the little cut marks that I made earlier. Once it was dry, I hot glued it to the top of the pear and I really think this turned out to be a beautiful modern farmhouse piece. This is another item that I picked up during my thrifting days, and it was part of my haul. I guess it's a cork saving container. That's what it would be, but I'm going to change it up a bit. I'm going to be using some of these wooden dowels that are square. I get them at Dollarama to make a stand for this bin. This wood is fairly easy to cut, so I'm just going to use my Mitre Box. Check this one out. It's really old. I brought it home from my cottage. It has been there for a really long time. I'm pretty sure my stepdad had it for a bit, but it has these little vices on either end that give you the ability to secure your piece in place so you don't have to hang on to it so much. So all I really have to do is hang on to the box itself while I'm cutting, and I don't have to worry about losing my cutting spot on the actual dowel. This miter box has been a lifesaver for me, and if I can find one similar, I'll link it down in the description box. I've cut the pieces into this type of shape. It could be a cross or a plus sign, whatever you want to call it, even an X. And I'm going to use my Weldbond glue to glue them all together. And then I'll set it aside to dry. I decided to add a little wood square to the bottom of the keg or the bucket or the bin, whatever you want to call it, just to make it easier for me to glue it to the wood. So I wanted wood to glue to wood and not metal to glue to wood because sometimes that can be a little funky and it might not hold. So again, just using my Weldbond glue, and then I'm just going to put a paint bottle on top of it to let it dry. Now that the X is dry, I can go ahead and glue the legs on. What I'm doing here is measuring out 1.5 inches from the top. That's how I want the little pieces of wood to stick up onto the little bin. I'm using some Weldbond glue at the bottom, and then I'm going to use some hot glue at the top, and that will help me to get all of this put together without having to wait each time for the Weldbond glue to dry. I'm going to do the same thing to apply the other 3 legs to the base using the Weldbond glue and the hot glue, and again holding it in place until it's set. I'm using another Americana gel stain. This one is in the color Maple. I've got it in a little bowl and I have a little bit of water there too. So I dip my brush in the water first and then into the stain. That just makes the stain a little bit easier to put on and it doesn't go on quite as thick. This also prevents me from having to rub it all down, and that to me is just wasting stain. If I have to put it on and wipe it off, then I'm just getting a whole bunch of my stain in my rag. So this way I can kind of make my stain go a little bit further. So now I'm going to be working on this little container. You can see here that the lid is now gone. I had my son help me. He's an electrician and he had an electric bandsaw and he was able to cut through that pretty much like butter. So I was really lucky to be able to get that lid off. Otherwise, it would still be on. There's no way I'd be able to get that off myself. So now I'm just taking some of my white DIY chalk paint and I'm going to give this a couple of good coats and get a nice solid white on there. I'm just going to use my blow dryer in between to speed up the process. And then I'm going to be adding some more of that maple stain and making this look like a wood label on top of this. And it turns out really great. I'm using the same technique that I used on the pear, but this time I'm using a really tiny fan brush. And this was a really rough bristle brush and it works really well. I just needed to have something a little smaller for some more control because I'm working in a smaller area. I just went around the edges with another brush just to make sure that I got nice and close into all of the edges. And then I went over the stain with the fan brush just to rough it up and give it that wood grain look. I glued the bin to the stand just using my Weldbond glue again and set it aside to dry for a good couple of hours. Now I'm just taking a regular permanent marker in a silver color, and I figured this is probably going to be used as a planter, so I'm just going to put the word grow in, and I'm going to go over it a few times with the marker. It's going to be a very subtle look, so if someone didn't like it, they could definitely just paint over this portion of it, but I think it matches really well with the wood and the silver of this piece. I love how it turned out. My last project is using this large tin can. I'm going to paint it with a couple of coats of the baking soda white paint mixture, and I'm just using a large brush just to make the job a little bit quicker. I've got this wood round that I picked up at Michael's. I think they were about $1.25. I had used it on a previous project, but I sanded down a little bit of the paint. And now I'm using these wooden dowel pegs that were also from Michael's. I had actually purchased this in thinking that I might make some little mini rolling pins by gluing two of them together. That never happened, so I'm going to use them as riser legs on this little piece of wood. Just using hot glue, I'm going to start at north and then do south, then do east and west. And again, I'm just eyeballing, not measuring. It's not going to be 100% perfect, but it's good for me. A few weeks ago, I invested in some antiquing wax. This is the Folk Art Home Decor line of antique wax, and I am loving it. I'm so glad that I tried it. I usually just use my burnt umber acrylic paint and some water to make a stain out of it, but you get a much richer look using the antiquing wax. I am dunking my brush in some water so I can get a little bit more working time with the antique wax and so it doesn't go on so thick. Using this little poking tool, I went outside and I used my hammer and poked a hole at the bottom of the can so I would be able to put in a screw and screw it onto the wood riser. I'm just using a screw that's a little bit bigger than the hole I made so it has a good grip. And I also pre-marked where the center portion would be on the riser. And I made a little indentation with the same tool so I would easily be able to find the spot and then be able to screw it into the piece of wood. Now the piece is nice and sturdy and won't fall apart. I tend to watch a lot of different YouTube channels when I'm crafting, and I found someone who used some rice paper. So I decided to order some from Amazon. Unfortunately, I didn't pay attention to the type of rice paper I was getting, and mine has all these little leaves on it. It's very pretty, and I probably will use it for some projects. But for this one, I just kind of wanted it more plain, but that's okay. I'm going to work with it. Now, I did try using my paper cutter and that just made a mess of the edges. It tore it all up. So I ended up going back and just using my scissors to cut out a square label. Rice paper is much thicker than tissue paper, so I was able to put this through my printer without attaching it to printer paper. Now, I'm not sure what other types of rice paper may be this thick. Maybe I just got lucky with this one, but I'm really excited that I have another medium to use for my labels. I'm using Mod Podge to apply a generous layer on the bottom because, again, as I said, this is a little bit thicker than tissue paper, so I need quite a bit of glue at the bottom so it will stick properly. I'm going to very carefully just lay it on and smooth it out. I'm not putting a layer of Mod Podge on the top of this because I wanted it to keep its paper-like effect. The graphic I used for this is from the Graphics Fairy, so I'll have the link down in my description box. I'm just taking a lid from a canister that I found in my stash. I tend to take the lids off and redo the canisters and use them for arrangements, so I have lots of extras. I'm just adding some twine. I'm going to add a little sprig of greenery, and this project is done. This basket was a thrift store find. It was that regular honey brown kind of gold color. I gave it a couple of coats of white spray paint inside and out. Then I created this little label and I printed this off on rice paper. I'm going to trim it right up close to the label edge and then I'm going to use Mod Podge to apply it to the basket. When you're putting square pieces of paper or tissue or whatever it may be onto something that is round, you need to adjust for that. So at the top, I'm going to just trim the edges a little bit rounded, sort of rounded down. And then for the bottom, I'm going to be rounding that in the center a little bit. It's hard to explain, but when you take a look at it this way on the basket, can see where you need to adjust it. If you haven't used rice paper before, it is a really nice thing to print on. This one happened to have some little green leaves in it, which I thought was okay. And I'm going to be giving the basket quite a thick layer of Mod Podge because of all those little weaves in there. I want this to stick really well. I'm going to be putting the label on and then using my finger to push it right into all of the weaves and the bumps and everything. So I want this to stick really well. I don't want it to look like it's floating on top. I want it to actually take on the texture and dimension of the basket itself. When I'm working with Mod Podge, I like to work in sections. So I just started with about an inch at the top and then I worked in my rice paper and now I'm going to add glue to the rest of the basket and continue working it in until it's fully secure. Because this is a little bit thicker than tissue paper, I am going to go over the top of it with Mod Podge and just make sure that it's sealed in really well. I love putting things on candlesticks and spindles. And if you've been with me for a while, you know that I do a lot of that. I just think it elevates a piece and makes it look so pretty. So the candlestick that I'm going to be using is wood and it's dark brown and I don't want to paint it. So I'm just adding a little bit of brown antiquing wax to the edges of the basket. And I'm going to go a little bit on the inside of it too, just more like a dry brushing effect. So it has a little bit of color and texture and blends in much better with the brown candlestick. Next, I took my drill and I drilled a hole right in the center of the basket all the way through. And the reason I did this is because the candlestick that I'm using has one of those little spikes inside of it. And that's where you're supposed to just jam your pillar candle right in and then it won't tip. But I didn't want to take that off. They're so hard to get off. And I thought that's a perfect idea because then I'll be able to put some hot glue right in the hole and a little bit of hot glue all the way around. And then that will ensure that the candlestick stays securely on the basket. Once it's dry, I've got a beautiful rustic basket that would look great in any type of decor. I just love thrifting these small little baskets. I think this one is absolutely adorable. Of course, it's got that regular wicker color again, so we definitely need to upcycle this and make it a beauty in itself. I'm taking some white chalk paint, and actually, this is Fusion Mineral Paint in the color Picket Fence. And I'm using a pointed sash brush from Fusion as well. That just helps to get into all of the little nooks and crannies. It's also going to help me create a really nice line up at the top where the band is. I'm going to be leaving the band this color, and I just thought that would be a really nice accent for this basket. I also gave the inside of the basket a couple of coats because I'm not going to be putting anything in it or gluing any florals in this. I wanted this basket to just kind of be on its own and then you could fill it with whatever you wanted. To accent this, I'm just taking this beautiful black ribbon with a beautiful white stitching all along it, and I'm going to hot glue it right underneath that band. And I think the combination of the white, that honey brown, and this black really makes this basket look so elegant. It's simple, but looks so high end. I love this basket. I love finding these crates at the thrift store. This one was only $5. I do find that they're always priced really inexpensively. This guy is huge, but it needs a little bit of help. So I'm going to just pop off all of these flowers and stars. I'm going to start off using my little Cricut spatula, and for some of the stronger ones, I'm going to need to use a screwdriver. Be careful when you pop these off. They started to fly all over my workspace. I'm going to paint the green portion white with this Fusion Mineral Paint. It's called Picket Fence, and I'm going to have to give it about 3 coats because this green is fairly dark and I didn't want the coverage to be streaky. The other trend that I'm working on with this project is I'm going to be leaving the wood the way it is. So I'm going to paint the front and I'm going to leave all of the natural wood its color. That was one of the trends that is supposed to be showing up this year. More lighter natural woods, not so much paint and not so much dark stain. I decided to put the word storage on this. Now you don't have to, you could leave it plain or you could put a little bit of decoupage on it. Even though the trends may say that putting words and labels on things is on its way out, if it makes you happy, do it. I used my Cricut to cut out the word storage as a stencil. I'm going to use a makeup sponge from the Dollar Tree and some black chalk paint and just sponge it on very lightly. I'll have this storage word available as a free printable on my website. I'm starting off this project by gluing together these 3 wood pieces. You can see one is a little wonky there. So I'm going to need to use my clamps to make sure that they glue all together. I cut these discs out using my laser machine, and I'm going to use some wood glue to glue them all together. What I'm doing is making a lid or a cover for the lantern you can see down in the corner. When you're using clamps, you've got to make sure when you put the clamp down that it didn't adjust the position of your object. With wood glue, it's very easy because it's so slippery to get things moved out of shape a little bit. And that's what happened here, but I just needed to make sure that everything was lined up properly. And then I put 3 clamps on and just set it aside for about 10 minutes until the wood glue had a chance to set up. While I was waiting for that to dry, I took a whole bag of Spanish moss, just pulled out the whole clump, and now I'm just forming it into a bird nest. And this is the best way that I feel to create a bird nest. You're just going to kind of push things into the center, make a little hole like a well, and then shape it how you want it to be. Take out any pieces that don't belong, and it works out just fine. So I'm going to be laying this in the bottom of this lantern that I picked up at the thrift store. It was $3.99 and it's really heavy. I thought it was a really good quality. I didn't do anything to it. I'm not painting it. I just cleaned it up, and it's sort of that dark bronze color. The bird I'm using came from the Dollar Tree. I painted it white and brushed it a little bit with some gray. Now, before I start doing anything with this lid that I created, I'm going to use this little bamboo wood piece. It came off of a dog toy from my local dollar store, and anytime I see anything wood or bamboo or in unique shapes that I think might be useful for crafting, I pick them up. It doesn't matter what section of the dollar store they're in. I took that little dowel and then just hammered it in so it would all be a solid piece. Now I'm taking some dark walnut stain, and I kind of wish I would have stayed with more of a lighter color, but I do like how this turned out. I'm just using this stain on the lid, and I'll use it on the little dowel piece, and then I'll just wipe off the excess. To decorate a little bit more around the bird, I'm going to add some of these little white wax flowers that you can get from the Dollar Tree. I've cut each little tiny stem individually, and I'm also going to be adding some eucalyptus leaves. And I'm just going to poke them in with a little bit of hot glue right into the Spanish moss just to hold them in place. And this will just be really easy to be able to take out if you want to put something different in it, if you want a candle in it and actually have it do its purpose, or just leave it for decorative use and also be able to change it out for the seasons. I also added some of the little picks and the greenery onto the sides of the Spanish moss just so it would look like it's poking out from underneath the bird nest. I love how this one turned out, and you'll have to let me know what you think of it too.